Welcome back to the brand new Real Personal Branding podcast. Today on the show, we have Jake A. Thompson. And Jake and I have not only worked together, but Jake is also a personal friend of mine. It's kind of funny, actually, how we met. We were at this giant conference where every speaker spent about maybe 40 minutes of their 60-minute presentation telling us why they were so important and like bragging about how many followers they had. And I was kind of scratching my head asking, why am I at this conference? I don't make a point of attending conferences where the speakers aren't there to help people. And I was kind of feeling like I better have a real conversation with someone soon, or I'm going to just go back to my room and get some work done. I don't know if any of you have ever been there, but Jake and I had connected that week via a mutual friend, and we had lunch together earlier in the day. And while I was kind of at that event during this VIP dinner, I had sent Jake a text as a joke about leaving because I couldn't take it anymore. And I absolutely can't speak for Jake on this, but I had a sense that he maybe at least wasn't feeling the current speaker either. And as I sent that text, he replied, "Oh yeah, I already left, but if you want to grab a drink and talk business and music, I'm right down the hall at this music bar." And a friendship was formed from there because I love music and I love making friends and having new connections and new people to kind of build those relationships with in business. Now we have done multiple projects together. We've attended events together. We've exchanged so many Seinfeld jokes. Jake is super humble, as you'll hear in this interview, but he really does speak on big stages. Between him and his small business, he's directly impacted over 75,000 people to date. And you'll hear people say and throw out big numbers like that all the time. And you wonder, like, is that really true? But it is true with Jake. He's the real deal. He knows he's helped this many people because he literally has a spreadsheet where he's kept track. It's amazing. He's truly living out his role as Chief Encouragement Officer every single day. And I can't wait for you to hear from him about his personal branding journey. I just want to point out that sometimes people believe business relationships would start with followers, with going viral for a certain reel or a TikTok, or with being on stage. But Jake and I met and have done business together because we shared a common experience and we decided to make a little time for each other. Keep that in mind. With that, I will read you his official bio and we'll get started with the interview. Jake Thompson is a keynote speaker and Chief Encouragement Officer at Compete Every Day, a brand he started in 2011 by first selling t-shirts out of the trunk of his car. Jake works with organizations and individuals around the country teaching how they can develop their focus, habits, and the culture in order to grow their business and their individual lives. It's through his entrepreneurial sales experience, client work, and research that he's built a proven CE3 model to help people build their grit, better block out distractions, and create more influence as an impactful leader. And without anything further, let's get to the interview. Welcome to the Real Personal Branding Podcast, Jake Thompson. I'm so happy you're here today.
What's up, Lauren?
I'm glad that you're doing this with me. This is one of my very first episodes coming back with the relaunch of the podcast. I'm so excited. I feel a little rusty, but I think it's going good so far. I think it's going good.
No rust. we talk like what? Every other week as it is.
Do.
So like
I know.
No rust.
It's so true. It's so true. That's why I was like, you know what? Putting Jake in the beginning here and it'll make it kind of easy on me, a little easy entry. So how are you doing for real? How are you doing for real?
For real?
For real.
I'm good. I told you I'm a little tired. Just got in this morning from a keynote yesterday, but I only have 2 this month. Both are here in Texas. So short travel, which is easy. And I like the drive time now. I used to drive like all over the country when we were just e-com. And I would do like trade shows. And so I loved my road time. And then I got really tired of the road time. And so now, because I'm airports and TSA, I kind of like a little bit of road time, just me, audiobook, podcast. So I'm feeling good. And
I always tell people I love driving places because I get to listen to books and be with myself, and I can't do anything with my hands. I can't look at my phone or anything. I'm just driving. And
you can.
You can.
It's just not preferred.
Yes, that's true. That is true. People think I'm crazy when I say that I love those road trips. So I'm glad to find another person who likes road trips and audiobooks. Okay.
Yes. The worst part of a road trip is the going home.
That's true.
Like going out somewhere, you're seeing everything for the first time. It's fun. Like going home, you have to take a different route, but it's just still a little more tiring than the going.
You're right. Going home is it's always different. That's for sure.
Yep.
I know a little bit more about your background because, as you mentioned, we've worked together. We've had many conversations, and I know that some of your leadership lessons that you've learned have stemmed back even to like having a family business when you were younger. Can you give us a little background, kind of give the short version, the non glossy bio version of how you ended up here today, knowing what you know, doing what you do now? Kind of give us the synopsis.
Yeah. So the early leadership lessons for me were like in a gas station, which, people a lot of times find interesting if you meet me now. But I grew up in a teeny tiny town in Texas, and my dad was an entrepreneur and had a little Diamond Shamrock gas station. And like any kid that grows up when your mom or dad has a business, guess what? You're free labor. You're working in the
Nice.
business on Saturdays and weekends. And so I got to learn a lot about dealing with people, about leading, about managing stress just by watching him growing up and then working in the stores. And that was a real eye opener for me from the standpoint of having to build that business, dealing with people who steal, like literally steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from you, people that, just don't show up to work. And then the next day want to show up. Like, how do you handle those issues? And then how do you handle and lead people that are loyal? Like, how do you essentially make people want to or help people be loyal to this idea and this brand, and you treat them in a way that's kind of family? And so I learned all of these lessons early on, but I also learned early on that I did not want to go into that line of business. I just seeing it up close and personal, I was like, I don't want to do this. I can't handle some of this. And especially at that time, really early on in my life, emotionally very immature. I was on a roller coaster a lot of times. Took a lot of things very personally. And so conflicts and things like that, really, I just didn't handle well.
Mhm.
So I was like, you know what? I'm going to do what I love. And I decided I wanted to chase after being Jerry Maguire, sports agent. That was it. Went to college, went to grad school, thought I was going to do it, got into it, didn't like it, didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. And I couldn't get a job after that. It was 2008. It was the recession. I had an MBA in sports business. I had non-traditional work experience at an agency, at the Dallas Cowboys, at an arena league team. And I just kind of started talking to people word of mouth of like, hey, how can I help your business? I can do
Mhm.
marketing. I can do a little bit of branding. And just from there, I was trying to build a business while at the same time, I was trying to make some kind of positive impact. And I didn't really know what I was doing at that time, but I just started every single day posting just a motivational or uplifting quote on Facebook at the time. Like every morning I would post it. And then
Yeah.
I got to where I found like Hootsuite, and I was posting like every morning at 7 a.m. and just kind of started developing this reputation as kind of an encouraging type of guy. I love to uplift people. I think there's so much negativity in the world that I want to call people upward instead of try to push them down. And after a few years at consulting, I was really unhappy with the work. I was doing well financially, but I was unfulfilled. I had no real purpose. I was just making money to buy toys and go out and chase women and all the things that a lot of single guys do in Dallas. And I said, I want to do something more. I want to build something more than a sandcastle that's just going to wash away. I want to start making a better impact on people. And that's really where the culmination of this idea of competing every day came from,
Mm.
because I realized in my earlier life, I'd given up opportunities out of fear because I was afraid of failing, or I was afraid of, if I failed, what would my worth be and who would I become? And when that happened, I walked away from an opportunity in college playing sports that just kind of haunted me. And I went into kind of a mental hole. Like I didn't know what real depression was, or, the weight of some of the decisions I was carrying. I just knew like I was really unhappy and I was really sad about this. And this decision haunted me. And flash forward 10 years later, and I'm doing this consulting and I'm seeing friends do the same thing. I'm seeing them settle. I'm seeing them play it safe. I'm seeing them let fear talk them into things that they're far less than their potential. And I thought there's got to be a better way. And that ultimately started me down that path of really launching the Compete Everyday brand, which at the time was just nothing more than how can I encourage people to start taking action in their own life instead of being a prisoner to fear.
Mm.
That little journey that started in 2011 of me selling t-shirts out of the back of my car just slowly started to blossom, not nearly as fast as I thought it was, like all of us when we start a business.
Right.
It's a long, slow, painful journey, but it started to grow. And in 2014, I had a chance to speak at a specific event, and the event planner, the VP, pulled me aside and said, I think you should go do more of this. And that little seed got planted. And I've always been into leadership development, performance. I've just I'm fascinated how people get better. I'm fascinated how we improve, why certain people succeed, why certain people win and others don't. And I used to believe it was like luck, that some people are born lucky and they're just in the right place at the right time. And the more I looked into it and the more I studied it, I said, no, it's these people are just taking little bitty actions every day that are putting themselves in better and better positions. And they're essentially not changing everything overnight. They're just stacking Lego blocks. And so what if you applied this mentality of this Lego block, which is teeny tiny by itself, worthless, but you stack it with thousands and you can build something. And that's that idea of 1% better than the day before. 1% is not much. It's a Lego block. But if you do that over time, you become successful. And when I started to understand that and started to see that, I said, I've got to teach other people this. Yeah. How can they do that? Because a lot of us have this idea that success and quote, making it is like winning the lottery. And it's really not. Luck happens. It's out there. People win the lottery all the time, but banking on that for success is a fool's errand. And what's really happens is if we get into the habits of building and stacking Legos, it's harder, it's longer, it's challenging at times, but it's those challenging things we do in life that we find more purpose. And in that purpose, we find more growth. And when we find more growth, we find more impact on others.
When I was talking to like Gay Hendricks in a previous episode, when he chose to write a book about taking the big leap and living in your genius zone, it means that, he had to stay committed to it the rest of his life, like living inside that genius zone. Do you feel that you live within the concept of building blocks over time every day? Tell me a little bit about how that weaves its way into your life.
Yeah, it's really becoming more and more self-aware and more intentional every day to say, where do I want to get better? Because it's not about perfection. Perfection is a myth for most every single one of us. I mean, you think about it from a sports standpoint, which is what I love and talk about. There's rarely a perfect game. Even in a perfect game for a pitcher, they still maybe have an errant ball. They just happen to recover. Like they recovered well. Everybody on the team worked together to create a perfect game. A winning championship team loses games. They miss shots. They miss passes. There's turnovers. They just come together in that imperfection and respond accordingly. And in life, there's a group of people who are waiting for the perfect time, perfect situation. And then there's a smaller group that are saying there's never going to be a perfect time. How can I just make this imperfect time a little bit better? And that's really where I get into is looking every day of like, today's a perfect example we talked about. Last night, I had a keynote with a construction client. It went well. I tested a couple of new things with them that I hadn't done before based on some areas I was playing with. And afterwards, I was like, I didn't come out as well as I wanted to. It wasn't as sharp as I wanted to. So I just made notes and said, this are two areas I want to practice now going forward to revise in that talk. So it's taking the awareness instead of what a lot of us do of like, I wish I hadn't said that to my spouse. I wish I hadn't done that. I wish I'd spent more time doing this. We tell ourselves this and we file it away up here, and then we never follow through with actually correcting the behavior or trying something new. And so I think that's where that intentionality comes in. So every morning it's waking up. It's as I start my day of like, what's my intention for the day and where yesterday is there room for improvement and looking for it? Do I need to push myself a little bit harder in the workout? Did I push myself a little too much yesterday? I need to be smarter about recovery and mobility today. Do I find myself distracted when I go on Instagram to make a post that I need to be like, okay, how do I get on and get off much more effectively? It's really this idea of every day, if I can build these little habits and I track them all, I have like a sheet, our scorecard that we talk about, where I have like 5 or 6 habits every day I track. And I know that doing it once isn't going to do anything.
Yeah.
But doing it every day over time will really benefit me. And so that's where I try to live, is not change my life all at once, but say, where do I want to be in 5 years? And if that's really where I'm committed to be in 5 years, what's a single action step if I did on the daily basis would forge me, for lack of a better phrase, into that person?
Do you ever look back on your older goals or like look back on some of the things that you set 5 years into the future for yourself before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. The old 5 year. I mean, 5 years ago, I was not planning to really, I was just getting into speaking. So like a whole different ball game.
Oh my gosh.
It's funny. I have little notebooks. I don't have an old one right here, but I have a newer one. Just little notebooks like this. I take them to conferences. I take them all over and just jot notes. Like when I have ideas, I'll sketch out talks or books or whatever, and I keep those and I'll go back and look at them. And it's really interesting for twofold. One, you see what you're focused on. You can learn really what you're stressed on at the time and think, shouldn't have been stressed about that like I was. Like that wasn't as big a deal. Or, oh, I was already thinking about this. Like that's really interesting when I go back to like 13, 14, 15, because I was so deep into building an apparel and e-commerce business. I wasn't even thinking about speaking, but I was thinking in that area of how do I create content that teaches these concepts. So I was already planting the seed of how do I get better at communicating this stuff without ever thinking I would be speaking on stages with it. And it just helps regenerate new ideas of, oh, that's what you were working on, or that was a goal, or this is something there. And so that's really helpful from a reflective process, because probably like a lot of your listeners, when we're chasing goals, we have a hard time being grateful for the ones we've gotten or for the progress we've made.
Yes. And it's hard to see backwards and see where without writing it down or without.
Hugely hard.
Yeah.
You can connect some dots looking back without it of like, those interactions were life-changing for me. Like you can see those that you don't realize in the moment, but the writing down process really brings a whole lot more of like taking you back to that moment, allowing you to reflect on it, then see the pieces in place of like, okay, what did I learn? How have we applied it? Where are we getting better? And I think that's the writing down process as a society. I think we've just gotten away from because we don't really write at all anymore. I laugh as like children learning cursive. Like I remember having to learn cursive. Like, what's the point now? Like sign your name. Like that's kind of it. Right. So it's looking back though on a lot of those things and that process that we can really practice gratitude, because in that moment of frustration where you are today, because it's not where you want to be, you tend to forget where you were a year ago and being grateful. And so this idea of constantly being grateful for what you've done while continuing to be hungry in a healthy manner for what you want is, I think, where a lot of successful people live in that tension. It's an interesting tension, but it's kind of it's not a scarcity tension of I'm afraid I'm going to fail, so I got to go. It's I'm grateful for the opportunity of abundance. How can I make the most of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I love what you're saying. Two things. I think it's really helpful to point out that what Jake's routine is, or like what Jake's goals are, don't have to be yours. Like if working out every day is not the thing that you want or doesn't get you close to your goals, that might not be the thing that you write down. But like for me, meditating every morning is something that if I don't do this combination of meditating, journaling, and drinking coffee, like that's my sacred time. And if I don't get to do that, then my whole day doesn't feel connected to me. It feels like it's connected to everyone else because I'm very adaptive to all the energy around me. And so I think it's like interesting and it's interesting, but it's also important to point out that looks different for everyone. There's no right or wrong 100%. Way to do that, right? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. There's no right or wrong way. What I would say is a great exercise is to sit down and say, who do I want to be in 5 years? Like what type of person? It could be the same, but just a better version. It could be, hey, I want to be nicer to myself. I want to be more resilient. I want to have whatever that case may be. I want to be a writer. Then you start to identify where you want to be, then say, okay, I want to be a writer. Okay, well, what's one thing you could do today to make you a writer? Sit down and write 100 words on a Word document and build a habit every day of writing 100 words. Or I want to be more resilient. Okay, there's a ton of different ways to build resilience. I like the physical aspect influencing the mental. So I would be like, hey, what about just kind of building the habit of working out? The meditation in the morning, the collecting your thoughts, setting the intention for the day is going to look different for you versus me. Mm-hmm. But I think what's really important is we identify who we want or the traits we really want to embody. And then we create non-negotiables in the now. For example, you just told me you're journaling, your meditation, your coffee. You're like, this is my morning routine. I would also argue it's your non-negotiable. That's something you don't negotiate. And I think when we start to reframe our routines or behaviors throughout the day as non-negotiables, that changes how we show up.
Oh, it's like, I love that.
It's like, hey, I have one of the non-negotiables I want is when I get together with friends I don't want to be on my phone.
Mhm.
Like I want to build the habit where it is a non-negotiable that I'm not going to be on my phone. So I'm 100% present in this moment. Or even I was telling guys last night, like the first 30 minutes you get home from work with your partner, your spouse, or your kids, what if your non-negotiable is just putting your phone in the other room for 30 minutes, setting an alarm, and that is your non-negotiable, that the first 30 minutes back home is with the most important people in your life that you work to provide for.
I just got the
And
chills. Yeah.
when we change those habits, when we change our language, we can start to change how we see it. And that's why like how we talk to ourselves is so important. But when we really start looking at it as these are the non-negotiables in my life, then we can start to really change how consistently we can build them, which ultimately change who we become.
Yeah. And the second thing I wanted to bring up, which I thought was really interesting that it just came right out in your story that you were telling, is that the show is called the Real Personal Branding Podcast, right? It's all about personal brands. And I wondered before you kind of started mentioning it, if you intentionally sought out to build a personal brand, or if this is something that started happening naturally. And then you said, hey, I think I kind of like this. And then you leaned into it. And that's something that I would love to hear more about, because a lot of people set out to start one intentionally and a lot of people don't. It kind of starts happening, and they get a little taste of it and they say, I think I could influence and impact more people with this. Tell me more about your journey inside there.
Yeah. So I've always really embraced the leadership type role. Like sports growing up, like I loved being the guy who was going to challenge and encourage.
Mhm.
And when I started consulting, I was all about like business type branding. Like when I started Compete, it was a brand for a company I was building, but it was so intertwined with who I was. And when I early on in my career, it was kind of like Compete Every Day was apparel. And I embraced this brand, and it was my old Instagram name and website. Life is worth competing for, because Compete Every Day, I wanted to kind of be the motivation heavy, but on my side, I wanted it to be the reminder that you have one shot at life, make the most of it.
Mm-hmm.
Like it is worth fighting for. Even on your worst of worst days, when you want to give up and check out, you still have something to fight for. And so that was where I went. But it wasn't like, hey, this is my personal brand. It was just like, this is the message I firmly believe in and want to get out. And it ties into this business brand I'm building.
Mm-hmm.
And I just kind of went down that path of, I would say more than anything, the brand I really leaned into most, probably the last 4 to 5 years, is the role I gave myself when I started Compete, Chief Encouragement Officer.
Mm.
Like that's where I go. I introduce myself as that when I go on stage, and it kind of chuckles because it's CEO. But I tell people during the talk, like I talk about kind of my regrets and say, I took on this title with pride, because what is encouragement but inspiring courage? And what's courage? It's doing something while you're scared to death. Like there's no courage without fear. And so I've really leaned into, how do I help people be less afraid? And so it was an unintentional at first, until I started to see there is an opportunity to really leverage and help people with this message and how I can convey it. And so then I went all in on it. And you'll notice like my Instagram posts, my podcast always end like I'm cheering for you.
Mm.
And that seems silly. And it was funny because I had some consultants years ago that were like, oh, it's too soft. Like you're too personally tied into it. And I thought, yeah, maybe. But there's somebody out there that's nobody's told them they're supporting them. Nobody's told them they're cheering for them. Nobody's told them that, hey, I want to see you succeed. And maybe 99% of the people that follow me have. But if that one person hasn't, and I never thought anything about it other than I'm going to keep saying this, keep saying this, keep saying this, until 2 years ago. God, I'm going to get freaking crying here thinking about it. My dog Huck died New Year's Day 2021. And he like went from okay to dead in like 3 days. And he was my boy. Huck was my boy. There's actually a picture of us over there on my wall. And I had to give a keynote like like less than a week later. And I was emotionally a wreck for that whole week. Just like we are. Anybody that's a pet parent that you've ever lost a pet, like it's like, that's our child. We know that.
Yeah, I can't think about it.
I know.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Yeah.
And I've got my sweet old lady Sugars down here, and she's getting up there. And so I'm going up, and I remember posting on Instagram, in my story. And I was like, all right, it's game day. I said, I'll take any prayers and encouragement before this talk that I can just like keep it together, because I had a story where I'd like mentioned him. And I got God, I haven't even told anybody this. I got I got a voice message and a DM, both on Instagram from two separate people. And both of them were just sending encouragement and said, hey, it's our turn to tell you we're cheering for you today. And I was like, fuck. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, that's it. And so, sorry, I didn't know if I can say that on your show, but I
Yeah.
did say
No,
that.
you can say it.
So yeah, when they said that, I was like, I don't care what anybody else says. Like, I'm going to say that line every single day to somebody or everybody as often as possible. And that really became the brand of, I'm going to encourage you. And sometimes encouragement is a kick in the butt of like, you need to raise your standard. And a lot of time it's just reminding you that somebody has your back.
Oh, thanks for sharing that.
Welcome.
I was sharing on a podcast interview this morning. It's interesting when that stuff comes back to you, when you don't expect it. I went through a hard couple of years, year and a half ago or so. And at one point I've always been very fiercely independent, like hung my hat on that, like just being a very independent person. And during that year, I had no choice but to lean on people that I loved, like lean on my friends and stuff. I was just a mess for at least 6 months. And they just really showed up for me in a way that I never asked them to, and I never was able to ask them to. They just were there. And I think it's like, as a person, you spend your life like giving to people and hopefully not expecting anything in return. And then when it does come back to you in return and you're actually able to feel that kind of love back, it's probably one of the most impactful feelings I think you can feel in your life. So thank you for sharing that story.
You're welcome.
As you were building your brand, as you were building this personal brand that you didn't actually intentionally decide at first to build, one of the things that I feel comes up with clients a lot and people that I work with is this feeling of worrying about what people think of them, worrying about being like embarrassed of rising to their full potential, or even like outgrowing people or outgrowing life situations, outgrowing anything in their life. Have you ever had moments where you feel like you personally, that you feel like you've either been embarrassed to lean in or you've had to outgrow some kind of situation in your life in order to bring yourself up to a higher potential that you could have? Tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah. No, you do. I think understanding there are seasons of life intentionally, and there's certain relationships you're going to outgrow. And it doesn't make the other people bad. It doesn't make you bad for outgrowing them. It just means that's a past season of life. We have that with friendships and relationships. I maybe talked to one or two people I went to high school with. I was also an asshole in high school. And who I am today is nothing like what I was then and who I was then. But it's not like I'm still going back trying to rebuild those relationships. I understand that was a season of life. And so I've had to go through that with circles. I've had to intentionally remove myself from hanging out with certain people that I found were constantly negative, complainers. They griped about a lot. They didn't take much action. Traits that I didn't want rubbing off on me, because I do believe in Jim Rohn's, you're the average of the 5 you spend the most time with. And so I've had that. I've had family, friends that I love and adore that for years were like, are you still doing that t-shirt thing? You're going to go get a real job. I'm like, okay, bro, like you have that. You have people that will always doubt. And the fear of other people's opinions robs the world of more potential and output than anything else, robs it of creativity, because we worry about that. And we have to get to a point, and it's hard. As an only child, I love attention. And I do. And I still have issues where if there's a perceive somebody suddenly doesn't like me that I respect or like, and I don't know what I did, like it can eat me up mentally.
Yeah.
And I just kind of started talking to myself lately and reminding myself, like, if they don't have to live with the results of the work I do, if their opinions don't influence whether I succeed or not, why am I investing so much? Like, it's not like they're a family man, like in my immediate house. It's not like they're in my council of close friends I spend time with. It's not like they're cutting me the checks to hire me to go speak. Why am I giving them mental bandwidth and energy that I could be used in serving the people that do or that need it? And that's a long journey to kind of get to that point, but it's crucial because people are always going to judge.
Mhm.
Everybody judges things that stand out. And what I've seen time and time again is that the people that judge and criticize you are never the ones who are doing better. They're never the ones taking chances. They're never the ones improving, because every successful person I've ever seen is always like, hey, that's awesome. Here's how you can make it better. Or how can I help you? Like people that are 10, 20, 30 steps ahead of me on the journey are always like, hey, let's talk. What are you doing? What's working? How can we help you? How can we support you? The ones that maybe are a little bit behind me are always like, I don't want to talk about, share anything. I'm going to keep it up. I'm not going to cheer for you. Like that's when you start to reframe and realize that people criticize others who take risk are the ones who sit in the stands and never do anything and will end up with the biggest regrets in life, because they're going to have the what ifs had tried. And so for you launching a personal brand, trying something, like you're the only one that has to live with the result. Like you're the only one that has to deal with that. So don't let someone who's not in the trenches with you determine how you get up and fight.
Yeah. And sometimes it might be very close people to you that you realize, like you didn't even realize were not cheering for you. You know, it can be
100%.
wrapped up in care. It can even sound like, oh, I'm just telling you this because I don't want you to fail, or I don't want, you know, it can be wrapped up in manipulation in that way even. So
a ton. The best litmus test I have for people in that is, and I posted it and absolutely love this kind of visual I came up with, is, are your friends the type of people who will slam their fist on table, jump up like in a cafeteria room, screaming for you when you succeed? Or are they the kind of people that give you a golf clap because they don't want to celebrate too hard because you're doing well? Like if your friends don't lose their mind, especially if your friend is not in a successful season, if your friend is working that process, they're starting the business, which we know is just a clog. But if they're starting it and they're still celebrating you having success, that is a friend. And most of us have acquaintances that we're investing life in as if they're best friends. And they're not best friends because they don't actually want us to win or care if we do. Real friends want us to win.
And I would say that most of the time when somebody is the golf clap individual, right? Generally, it's not, I would say most of the time, it's not a reflection on you. It's something
100%.
that they are struggling with. It's something that they're dealing with. You can have big empathy for what they're going through and still keep a boundary and keep them at a certain place in your life, and not take what their opinion of you is as solid information or truthful
100%.
information. So like it usually has nothing to do with you, even if it seems like it has something to do with you. And that's one way that I've definitely helped myself outgrow some of those like feelings of, what if I do this and then that person thinks I'm silly? You know, it's like, how, Lauren, why does that matter so much? Why does that matter that much?
And you talking to yourself is so important. Just like continuing to remind yourself in those moments when you feel the need to, of like, why am I craving this? Why do I need this? What can I do to improve?
Right. Okay. So Jake, you work with emerging leaders, new leaders really, that have kind of been moved into these leadership roles. You work with them a number of ways. You train and facilitate, but you also speak on big stages all across the country. Some statistics I heard recently that you and I were discussing recently were that 58% of managers said that they didn't receive any management training. 79% of people quit their job due to lack of appreciation. Only 10% of CEOs believe that their company's leadership development initiative have a clear business impact. And 63% of millennials said that their leadership skills were not being fully developed. I am wondering, how do you know that a new leader has potential when they are kind of inundated with there's these statistics out there, like a new leader gets put into a position, they don't feel developed, they feel under-resourced, right? How do you know that a new leader has potential? And also, I wonder if there's anything that you think can be learned from a new leader who is in that very green stage.
Yeah. So in terms of how do you recognize, I think there's specific traits that we want to look for. Like first is what is their work ethic and life look like? Like not necessarily just the results, but like how do they show up What do they do with the items in their control? What kind of team member are they? How do they coach and mentor their peers? I think there's definitely signs of that. What I think we often do is, hey, you're amazing at this job. We're just going to go ahead and promote you. So like we take an A+ salesperson and we make them a C- manager because we assume you crushed it in sales. You know how to manage people. And that is not just in sales. We see it in construction. Oh, you can manage this project. Now we need you to lead people. And leading people and developing people is a very different job skill set than a lot of others. And so there's no surprise a lot of these people feel like they're underdeveloped. I would even imagine you have a lot of people, a higher number of people that are underdeveloped, but don't realize they're underdeveloped because just like a painful family history of a drug abuse or an alcoholism or abuse, something like that, to where it's cyclical. Like the child doesn't know any different. And so they grow up and end up doing the same thing until somebody in that family says no more. There's a lot of company cultures that are the same way. Terrible manager teaches who reports to them how to quote unquote manage. And so they're put in the same position. They assume, well, that's how I was taught. So this is the way to do it. So there's even more that haven't been quality developed and taught on how to manage and lead. And so I think that's a big piece of understanding for leaders, stepping back and looking at their organization and say, how are we actually developing the skills required to be a good leader? How are we teaching people to build connection with their teams so they see people as people and not just numbers on payroll? How do we help teach them the difference between managing and coaching? How do we communicate our values so they're not just pretty words on a wall, but what are examples of us living them out? These are all things that we can identify different traits of, but we have to have a system to teach it. From a new leadership standpoint, I think there's a ton of opportunities to ask of like, you get a whole new learning experience when somebody's brand new because you learn, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What are you experiencing? They're going to open your eyes, especially if there's a separation between, say, a higher level C-suite and a frontline manager that's new. There's going to be a huge disconnect between their roles and what they do on a daily basis. And sometimes the C-suite and higher levels can lose touch with a lot of the frontline. And so that new leader can say, hey, I stepped into this role. I'm still figuring out. I don't see X, Y, and Z. Do we have a system in place? They ask a lot of questions. And I think that's really what we want, is to encourage people to step into leadership roles and ask questions and be curious, instead of the old school model that's like, don't ask questions because people may know that you don't know what you're doing. Or we worry like, oh, they're going to find me out, like the imposter syndrome. Whereas great leaders all the way to the top of an organization are saying, I don't know. Tell me more about that. Let me ask questions. And so I think learning from new leaders is encouraging them to look and ask questions, and then us not immediately shooting them down, but starting to pull at threads to see what are they seeing differently than I am. Because for a lot of us, if we're small business owners, big business owners, leaders, we've been in our business and in the weeds for so long that sometimes we need somebody with a new perspective to help show us a different way through the forest.
That's exactly what I was just going to ask you, is like, a lot of the people that listen to this podcast are entrepreneurs, they are speakers, they're podcasters, they're small business owners. I'm positive that some of those leadership lessons from larger companies, from companies with hundreds of employees, can be distilled down into a few concepts that any leader, whether you have one virtual assistant or one executive assistant, or whether you have 3 employees or a team of 12 or a team of 200, those things can be applied. What are a few things, what would be a few tips that you would give, tactical tips for small business owners, entrepreneurs, that can help them lead even their smallest teams?
Yeah. So even 1, 5, 10 people, I think the first and the most important is, unless you lead yourself, nobody's going to follow. And I set that as example because a lot of people lead really well with their lips and very poorly with their life. And if your lips say one thing and your life says something else, you're giving 2 different stories, and people will always follow your actions. Yep. And so making sure as a business owner, if you're expecting your team to live to a certain standard, to behave a certain way, to do certain things, you have to first model that behavior. The second piece is, how are you spending time connecting with your people? And I've been guilty of this. Like, we hire people to do jobs and tasks, and then we really only talk to them about the jobs and tasks. And some of us listening, there may be people that have worked with us for 2, 3 years, And we know what they do. We know what they do really well. We know a few of their quirks that drive us crazy. We may know their spouse's name or kid's name. Mm-hmm. But if we ask them like what their goals are, what they like to do outside of work, who they are as a person, we'll fail that test. We haven't invested in the person. And unless we invest in the person, it's going to be really hard to lead them. And the beauty is the more we invest in a person, the more we kind of find out what their goals are, how to set them up for success. Ironically, the more motivated they are to work with us and stay with us because they know like this person cares about me. They know me. And so clients, like one of my CEOs, he was with an organization at the time, they were 45, now they're 100. He spent the first like 3 months on the job. Every single morning, he'd take 10 to 15 minutes to have coffee with a different team member just to get to know him. Don't tell me work. Tell me who you are. Tell me about your family. Tell me, like, he just wanted to know all of them. And that's something that if we have one person, it's really easy. If you have 10 people, it's still easy. It's just being intentional to know our people on that end and continue to follow through. And then the one I always go to is, what kind of communication pattern is it? Like, some of us, like, we hire somebody, we have them on a team, we tell them a job, and we completely leave them alone because we have this fear of being a micromanager. But teams and people need consistent communication, even if it's just a check-in. Hey, just want to check in. Where are you? And I saw a really cool graphic that when we have people on our team, the way we don't micromanage them is when we give somebody a new project, we kind of work with them and manage with them like 75% of the time. We let them do 10 to 15% by themselves, and then we help them with the last 10% or so. As they gain experience, what gets to the point where we really give them the first 10, 15%, we check in when it's about 80 to 85% done, and then we get the final piece. Because what we're doing is in the beginning, it's almost like we're the coach and we're teaching you the plays. And then you're going to go practice the plays and practice plays. And then when we get into a game, all we do is call the play and you execute. And then afterwards, we're going to watch film and say, what went well? What do we need to do differently? And I think that's where this fear of, I don't want to micromanage. I don't want to be all over somebody. There's a need to be in consistent communication with people so that you're not talking to them only when you're upset or when a project's gone wrong or when they've missed a deadline. You're consistently touching in to say, how can I support you? So leading yourself, connecting with them, and then working on the communication is key.
Yeah. So a couple things I heard in there too is like, okay, when you are connecting with somebody, you want to be the same person. You don't want to be just checking boxes like, it's time to connect with this person today. So I'm going to send an email that says, how are you doing? And that's it. It's actually giving a shit about the people that you're working with. It's like actually caring about those team members. And that really ties into personal branding, because when you are building a business, it is like our mutual friend, Mike Kim says, it's not about closing a sale, it's about opening a relationship. And you're doing the same things as a thought leader, as someone on stage, as somebody who is speaking to lots of people. You want to be the same person behind closed doors that you are
100%
online, that you have that integrity and that consistency that you were talking about, the consistency of showing up as who you really are.
Yep, absolutely.
What do you think is the key to becoming a leader like you who people want on stage, on the big stages? What is one tip that you could give if somebody is building their personal brand, they're building their small business, but they see themselves leaning into this, they see themselves growing, and just knowing your trajectory from working in a small business as a kid, like finding your way in the college area, then like creating this company out of something that's happened with you organically, sharing positive motivation. Then on top of that, becoming a speaker and now a leader and a trainer and facilitator. What do you think is one of the keys to becoming someone who people want to see on stage?
I think there's twofold with it. I think the first is constantly having a focus on how you can help others versus how you can get attention for yourself.
Ooh, love
a lot of people want to go on stage because they have an amazing story. Mm-hmm. And the sad truth is nobody in the audience cares about your story. They care about what your story or lessons can do to help them. And when we reframe that, even if we're a service provider, we host a podcast, whatever our business is, if we come into this mindset of not how can I get more money, how can I get more attention, it's how can I help more people, that's really where growth and success starts to happen. I mean, Zig Ziglar's old quote of if you want to be successful, help other people find success is true. And so that's the first and foremost, because I think that sets your intention on everything. I think the second one is to be impatient in the day-to-day and patient in the long term. Patient for the years and patient in the day. And what I mean is every day, wake up very intentional of how you're going to attack the day and make progress. How are you going to be consistent in what you post online? How are you going to be consistent in creating content and finding new customers and serving your current customers? Like never giving up a day. It's like never giving up. If you're in baseball, like you never walk up to the plate and just give up an at bat. You always take swings. And so that's it. But understanding at the same token, like it's a long game.
Yes.
Like you're not going to get there this week, this month. You could maybe not even get there for 5 years. And being okay to say, I'm going to play the long game. I'm not going to make decisions now that hurt me in 5 years. I'm not going to take shortcuts. I'm not going to cheat folks. I'm going to play the long game of business, but I'm going to be very impatient in how I do work every day to try to get as much done as I can to move the needle. And then at the end of it, be okay with, I have tomorrow. How am I going to do the same thing tomorrow?
Very cool. So many gems here. I'm so happy and grateful for this interview. One last question I want to ask you that I love to ask is, what's one myth you want to bust today about your industry, about you, about anything in particular?
Not everybody that you see doing well on social media is actually doing well.
We've had lots of conversations about
I know
this.
it is. And I say that because for those of us, say we're a solopreneur, or say we have one employee, or say we have 10, it's so easy to go on social media and see somebody that we think is in our sphere or quote our competitor. And online, they look like they are crushing it. And what happens? You get in your own head. You feel bad about yourself. You start doubting yourself. You start thinking, what are they doing? I'm not. You go through all of those rabbit holes when in reality, they just posted a pretty picture on Instagram, but they're drowning in real life. Like there's no success. And so don't fall into the trap of what you see online. Continue to share your story, be authentic online. But just because you see something great on there doesn't mean it's actually great. And when you can understand that context and embrace it, then all you care about is how can I produce stuff that helps, encourages, makes somebody else better? And how can I stop worrying about where I'm comparing myself to other people online? Because that's a bad game, because I don't actually know what game they're playing.
Oh, love it. And actually, fun fact, you and I met at a conference where I won't say what conference, but we both couldn't stand watching the people from stage because it just seemed like it was a lot of grandstanding and a lot of information that was just for pure effect and for looks and perception. And both you and I had just met like that day, and we were like, let's go get a drink and talk about real things, like real important things in life. And stop watching celebrities. So yes, I love it. It's very you, perfect myth to bust. Where can people find out more about you, and where can they get this scorecard that you were talking about?
Yeah. So best place for the scorecards, my website, jakeathompson.com/scorecard. You'll learn a little bit more about me. You can get connected to the podcast or my book. And then I tend to only hang out on 2 channels. I'm on Instagram and LinkedIn. Both of my usernames there is Jake Thompson Speaks. And anything we talked about on here, if you want to pull at that thread, go down a rabbit hole, we'd love to get a DM or message from you and continue the conversation.
Yeah. And I can say that Jake is very much active on those platforms. Like he's actually there. So if you're reaching out to him, know that you will get Jake. Thank you so much for being here. This is so much fun.
Dude, appreciate you. As always, this was a blast. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Sometimes I hear people telling me to push myself, but as someone who has hustled my way through my entire adult life until this point at 35 years old, I lately feel myself rejecting anything that comes even close to feeling like I'm pushing myself harder and harder, or like there's no way to customize it to myself. And so I really enjoyed how Jake talked about finding what is right for you and competing with yourself there. And I just really wanted to pull that out in case you didn't pull it out yourself. I want you to know you have to compete with yourself on the things that matter to you, not to anyone else. I am looking for that slow, soft life. So for me, competing every day could even look like, how can I build a more peaceful life every day? What Jake said in this interview really helped me think of doing things for my future self in a really kind and loving way. I want to know what you think, though. I would love to hear your feedback. Feel free to direct message me on Instagram or LinkedIn. And if you'd like to get my helpful emails that sometimes talk about marketing and branding, but also once in a while include some spicy life stories from time to time, you can sign up at the link in my show notes. And if you reply to any of those emails, I will always respond. It's really me back there. Let's be real friends. Thanks for listening to the Real Personal Branding Podcast. Talk to you next time.